So in this video, we are going to be talking about the Mackie DLZ Creator digital mixing board. It's a mixing board focused on podcasting, content creation, streaming, that kind of whole package from Mackie. Some legalities to get out of the way. Mackie sent this over a few months ago for me to check out and review. I'm now getting that review, but they have no say what goes into this video, and I'm legally obligated to let you know about that. So yeah, it came out earlier this year, and it's been getting good reviews, and I'd say it is an excellent mixing board, mostly pros. There is a few cons though, and we'll get to those cons in a bit. But I've been putting it through its paces, using it as a general mixing board for various things. I'm also a veteran podcaster, so I'm definitely aware of that experience. However, I don't really podcast with multiple people in the same room, which this is kind of focused towards in a way. In the past, I've podcasted with people on Discord or Zoom and that type of thing. But yes, the DLZ has a lot to like about it. So I'd say one of the standout features of the DLC is the fact that it is 4 channels of microphone preamps that are high gain microphone preamps, meaning it has 80 decibels worth of preamp gain, which is very important for microphones like the SM7B, which I'll get to a little sound test in a bit with that. That's important because the higher you push a microphone preamp, the more the noise floor comes up. Even though your preamp might have, say, 55 or 60 dB worth of gain in it, if you crank it all the way, then you're gonna see a lot of noise. In fact, you can see this even on here. So if I select the second channel and I go into the second channel for the actual setup, here's the gain right here. If I just bump this up to, say, 60, you'll see there's already noise coming in without anything plugged into the channel. And if I boost it all the way up to 80, the max, you're seeing a lot of noise right there, just in the circuitry in general. This is why high gain microphone preamps are actually really important, because what will happen is you can use your microphones in the sweet spot for the preamp and not have a huge noise floor jump up. So that's why it's recommended for things like an SM7B or your general dynamic microphone to have a pretty high gain preamp. So the DLZ comes with 4 channels of 80 dB preamp gain, very good. It's also got EQ, gate, compressor, and de-essers built into the DSP for all 4 of these guys. And then channels 5, 6 through 9, 10, I believe, have EQ, gate, and compressors, no de-esser. So a nice amount of DSP flexibility right there. It also has 4 headphone outputs, which it should since there's 4 microphones, but each one of these can have custom mixes with them. So if I go to, say, the second headphone mix right here, you can see there's quick mix, there's custom, and then there's standard. Standard is gonna be whatever the board is mixed to at the moment. So you can see the faders going right here. By the way, the 100mm faders are really nice. They're not motorized. They do feel really nice and have a nice long throw being 100mm. Back to the mix mode, then you have custom, which you can do a custom mix per headphone output. Let's say one of the podcast hosts or guests has a very specific mix that they want of everyone's voice. You can do that in here, have custom levels set up for everyone. This will not affect your main mix that goes out of the main left-right channels out of the DLC or even the recorder. So that's very nice. And then you have quick mix, which will take the reference of whatever's on the board and then adjust it positive or negative depending on how you have it on here. This is really great for someone that just wants a lot of themselves in the mix, but they don't care how everything else is mixed. So you could say channel 2 gets a big bump for the quick mix while it still retains the balance of everything that you have set up. So that way, if you do happen to drop or bring up some music in the mix, that person will still hear it in the mix. You don't have to go into a custom mix to give them a particular volume ride on that. They'll be able to hear it, but their own microphone will still be boosted up in relation to the original mix. That's really nice. And the final bonus on here is you can actually take the output of USB 3.4 and dedicate it to one of these headphone outputs. So you could say the 4th one gets USB 3.4 outputs on here, and you could do a custom mix or a quick mix. And let's say you don't want one of these channels in here, so you could just say mute 5, 6 and channel 4 from this mix. So the USB 3.4 output on the computer technically gets a different mix with either the quick mix or the custom. So that is very handy. Back to the features here, 4 microphones. You have a 5.6 input for, say, another mixer that is also running additional gear, say like a music production type of setup. Then you have a channel 7.8, which can be like an aux input, 1/8" aux input, or it can be USB 1, 2, or 3, 4 inputs into here, which that can be useful if you want to play some sound from, say, a computer and bring it in. Then for channel 9, 10, this is a bit of a wild card right here because it can either be Bluetooth, so you could have your phone hooked up to Bluetooth onto the board, or you can play something off the disc, whether it be flash drive or SD card. Then you also have NDI network. When I have tested this, you can have OBS connect via NDI through an Ethernet patch cable. You can do a couple things. You can send the actual mix of the DLZ into OBS Studio, and you can also send something else on the network into the input of channel 910 from the network. So some decent flexibility right there. Finally, you have a samples channel here, and if you're into using the samples, this is going to be great. If you don't use samples though, it's a bit of a waste, and this is one of the cons right here. It's a shame you can't repurpose, say, Bluetooth, disk, or MDI, or maybe even USB 1, 2, and 3, 4 into the samples channel if you don't plan on using the samples at all. Because as it is right now, it's basically just a 10-channel mixer if you don't use the samples. But this could change with the firmware update. They've already dropped one firmware update that added the NDI flexibility in there. So I could definitely see them expanding on this and adding features and adjusting features and all that. One thing for me would definitely be more flexibility for channel 1112, because it's a dedicated channel and it takes up a lot of space. If you don't use the samples on here, it's a bit of a waste. But that being said, you still have EQ, gate, and compressor features for all these channels, regardless of what they are. That's very handy. And also the master output right here, the left, right, also gets a compressor and EQ. So if you want to do some gentle compression to the master bus, like, you're good to go. You know, you can drop this ratio down to say 1.2 or 1.5. and just have a nice subtle compression going on. The effects, you got some basic reverb and delay. They're okay, you know, they get the job done, but nothing special. The media interface, it's useful, but it's a bit strange at times. VoiceOver Tefty here. I originally recorded this saying I had problems with media playback. Turns out it was user error. You have to make sure channel 7.8 has the disk selected, otherwise media playback will not happen because there's no channel routed for the media playback in the mix. You also have a snapshots menu right here, which is nice if you want to save some presets, but then you want to go to a different thing. Maybe you run a couple podcasts and you want to save individual snapshots per show. You could do that on here. So you can load up Monday's show, then load up Wednesday's show, then load up Friday's show. Maybe you have a radio show with multiple segments and each segment kind of needs their own mixing settings. You could do it with the snapshot type of thing. So that's pretty nice. Moving on to the samples. This is where you can adjust all your samples for these buttons for playback. And you can do some interesting stuff with them. Like, for instance, you can change the type of playback. You can change the color on there. You can rename it. You can also clear the sample. You can edit the sample from start point, fade, all that stuff. Definitely some nice flexibility right there. Now you can even record directly into the sample right here. It says record new sample, so you press that, and then you can hit start recording, and it'll record the entire board right here. I'm going to put the headphones on so I can hear myself. Check, check, 1, 2, 1, 2. All right, you are currently listening to the SM7B plugged in directly to channel 1 with the, what was the gain at? Let me look real quick. Gain is at 60 dB on here. I have an EQ curve set up that I did prior to this. The gate is working as well. And the compressor is kicking on, as you can see right here. And also the de-esser is activated as well. So you are hearing directly what this microphone sounds like, but let's record a sample real quick. So I'm gonna go back to B3 here. I'm gonna say record new sample, hit record. Now recording a sample on the Mackie DLZ Creator. And I'm pretty sure I just put some desk noise in there. Let's hear it. Now recording a sample on the Mackie DLZ Creator. Now recording a sample on the Mackie DLZ Creator. So there you go. That's how easy it is to record samples directly into this guy. And I think it's actually really flexible. I could even see it being used as something for like pre-recorded segments. Like maybe you need to do some intros that are pretty quick and you want to pre-record those before you go live with something. You could store the intros on here and then trigger those as needed and then go into your live show segment. Or let's say you're at a live venue and you need to do some sort of transition. You could load up tracks on here that are, you know, several minutes long. That can be your transitional tracks as you reset up something for a different project. So again, these samples are very useful. Now, here is my problem with these samples. And I guess for now, I will continue rocking the SM7B for the rest of this video. So here's my problem with this. If I go over to the banks right here, the only way to switch these banks, because there's 4 of them, 4 banks, is by pressing these little dots right here. And they don't always activate. I mean, right now it's activating, but I'm also I'm thinking about pressing this. And you can see it misfires here and there. So in the middle of a show, if I'm talking and doing a podcast, and then I'm thinking, oh, I should roll over to a particular sample and trigger it on here, this is a pain in the ass. A solution for Mackie is to just take this rotary encoder right here and make it roll through the banks. If you do this, then you could have even more banks, like say 8 banks or something. And at that point, you could easily switch through and then trigger your samples as needed. So that's one little nitpick right there. The other nitpick that I have about the sample stuff, these buttons don't activate as easily. See, if I just gently press this, it doesn't activate. So I have to push into it and then I get that air horn, which is pretty obnoxious. Let's turn this down. Sometimes it activates easily and other times it's a little stiff. So I kind of wish that they would have done something like with these buttons where you physically have to push in. You get like an activation feedback by pushing in, because there's no feedback on these buttons right here aside from just your own pressure of pushing into the button. So I think from usability point of view of like if you're talking in the middle of a podcast or production and then you reach over and you thought you pressed it but you didn't, that can be a little awkward. But aside from those nitpicking issues, it works fine. I'm gonna head over into the settings section right here, talk a bit about this. Now I have this in pro mode. I immediately went to pro mode. I didn't use the easy or enhanced. Quick TLDR on it is that if you don't know what you're doing, go into easy mode and most of the stuff should be automated for you. If you are an audio engineer in some sense, then I recommend going into pro, because you're going to want the control of the features and all that to be able to set up your channel strip the way you want them in the DSP controls. Moving over to the other sections though, so Bluetooth disc, you can do your management of the controls of stuff from Bluetooth and your SD card and all that. Recording routing is definitely something that you want to pay attention to, because this is where you can do either say a stereo recording of the board, or you can do multi-track plus stereo. Now here's another con about this right now. The recorded files that come out on the micro SD or the USB drive are currently one single WAV file that has multiple channels inside the WAV file itself. Now if you're using a professional audio production piece of software, this should not be a problem. It should be able to break all those pieces apart easily. But if you're not using something like that, if you're using something a little less traditional and expecting able to just break out those pieces, some tools might have a tough time with that. But you should know that as a firmware 1.1, if you do a disk recording on this guy, it is going to put it into one single WAV file that you will have to then split apart in whatever tool you're using to do your mixing. Just something to keep in mind right there. And what is nice is you can actually bypass the processing on this as well, and you can also do either post fader or pre fader. So if you want to have your live mix different from the actual recorded files that you get, so if you want to treat those files as if they're directly from the inputs that don't have any processing, you can actually do that on here while still having your left-right mix be processed for whatever live venue that you're doing. Now another handy feature right here is with the computer USB, you can either switch it to left-right or multi-track plus left-right as 1314. Now, why would you do this? Well, if you're using something like OBS Studio, if you use the multi-track, then input 1 and 2 is going to be microphone 1 and microphone 2. But if you use stereo LR12, then the entire mix, whatever comes out, the left-right mix right here, will be going into OBS Studio. And you also have the NDI output, which was added with firmware 1.1. You can either turn it off, mono, stereo. I mean, I would most likely do stereo for me personally. And then you get to select the sources and all that. And I'm not going to go into full tutorial about how to set up NDI, but you do have to jump through a few hoops if you want to make that work with your OBS setup. But from a streaming perspective, it is very handy. And again, you just have to make sure you're plugged in via a LAN cable. But NDI has been super useful for me in the past when I had two computer systems. One computer was running the games, another computer was running the streaming, and NDI helped with the audio connection on that. So it was really nice. Lastly, I didn't talk about the record and auto mix type of features right here. This is how you would actually record directly to the disk. So you'd hit record and then, do your thing from there. Then they have this auto mix feature, which I didn't really use, but I do think it's useful for people that don't want to do some mixing after the fact. You can basically click on auto mix and then turn on the channels that you want to have auto mixed. Let's say 3 channels. Let's say you're the main host and you're on channel number 1. You want to give your mic priority high, and then say you have some guests, you want to put them medium, so you're not being talked over when you need to announce something on there. You could do it that way. I wish that the auto mix went a step further and also included 5, 6, and 7, 8 on here, because let's say you have some music that you have going on or some sort of instrumentation that you want to play into the mix, and when no one's talking, you want that to come up. But when people start talking, you want those musical elements to go down. It'd be cool to have that option, but as it is right now, it doesn't appear that you can do that. But just FYI, I haven't actually used auto mix that much because I prefer to get hands-on with my mixes. Let's talk about the footprint here for a second. This is one of these things where it could be a pro or a con, depending on what you want to do with this. Now, if you want your mixing board to be present in your shots when you're recording video for a podcast, it's a nice looking board and it's nice to have it on the desk. If you're using this mostly as a streaming interface connection for connecting to Discord or something like that, and people don't see it on your desk, I think this takes up a bit too much space. Again, I like the fact that these faders are 100 millimeters and they feel really good, but for me, once I set something, I'm not going to really mess with it too much, and if I do, it's usually just going to be a few adjustments like this. I don't really need to do extremely fine-tuned adjustments after the fact. It's usually going to be in the middle of setting things up, which I could take a little more time with. So while I do like these faders, I think it takes up a bit much space. personally. I really like the screen, and I definitely wouldn't want this screen to be shrunk at all because it's really nice. It looks nice. The resolution on it isn't super high or anything like that, but it doesn't need to be. It definitely feels comfortable to use when doing things like EQ. There's a little bit of lag in the EQ, like if I go to track 2 here. A little bit of lag right there as I'm adjusting things, but again, it's one of these things where once you've adjusted it to where you want it, you're not going to suddenly go in and start adjusting things in the middle of a podcast or anything like that. So yeah, space economy wise, if you're putting this on your desk as a streaming interface off to the side, it's a bit big, honestly. Like it's the size of a laptop, essentially, on your desk. So that actually kind of brings me to another con that the DLZ has, and if Mackie designed this to be in the shot or on the desk as people are recording podcasts, then they're definitely thinking about the visual aspect or the video side of things. And in my mind, I think it's missing a pretty big feature for something that's already $800 or in this price category and being positioned as a professional tool for content creation, which also kind of implies video production. So timecode, it's missing timecode input and output completely. There's no way to put timecode into this, and there's no way to pull timecode out of it as you're recording things. And if you're just doing like say one camera angle for your podcast, no problem, right? Like you don't really need timecode. But this is implying that you could have up to 4 people. And if you have 4 people on a show, let's say each one has a camera plus a main, so you got 5 cameras. At that point, it's going to start making a lot more sense to use timecode with things. And this just is not going to give you any kind of timecode flexibility. You can clap, obviously, and clapping is great. So, you can line things up via audio and clap. But let's say a camera dies in the middle of a show that's 2 hours long and you have to restart it or something like that. That's where timecode saves you. Having to resync files that die in the middle of a show and then, seam them together and all that becomes really frustrating. So if this had timecode support, it would be an incredibly robust platform to do all that, but I feel like it's really missing that personally. And what's funny is I looked online and not very many people, if anybody, is talking about timecode with the DLZ Creator. Maybe it's just me, but I personally think like as soon as you get past a couple cameras, it becomes way more intuitive to use a timecode solution to sync your audio with your camera solutions. One potential workaround is you could dedicate, say, channel 7/8 as a timecode track, so you could just input timecode on that and then use that as a reference for your production software. Again, not having it baked into the actual WAV file of exactly what the timecode is just means that you have a few more steps you got to do, and if something does go wrong with somewhere in the process and you have to resync things, it can then start becoming a bit of a juggle to make it work. Finally, one last nitpick, channels 3-4. One thing that I wish they would have done that is not available currently is linking channels 3-4, because you have 5-6 as a stereo input that you currently have access to. Let's say you have a show that's only 2 people and never it's going to have 3 people. It'd be nice to be able to use channel 3-4 as a stereo channel and link them in here. And this is something that they could totally add as a firmware update at some point in the future. Who knows, maybe a year from now if you're watching this, maybe it already has it. But I think it's a slight misstep not to be able to link channels 3-4 for another stereo track, assuming you're not using these as actual microphone inputs for other guests on your show. But yeah, overall, I think the DLZ Creator is actually a really fantastic mixing board. It kind of makes me wish that Mackie would consider doing something like this with a bigger track count for music production, like say a 32 track digital mixer. I know they already have these rack mount ones that you have to load up an iPad to connect to them to be able to do the mixing on there, but something in this format that could actually switch through the channels I think would be really awesome, because I like what's going on in this interface and I like the way it sounds. I think Mackie did a great job with this. It is missing a few things personally, like that timecode's a big one if you have multiple cameras that you want to sync up and just have that freedom right there. The samples channel, while it's cool, I think there could be people that just never use the samples channel and then it ends up being like a wasted channel right there. Overall, really nice bit of kit, and I definitely recommend it if you are podcasting or need something for streaming. Finally, a little bonus thing that I did not mention is Mackie sent over this backpack, and it is an awesome backpack. It fits my 16-inch MacBook Pro in there perfectly, plus the DLZ and some few odds and ends that you can put in the pockets. Now you can't load up 4 microphones and 4 stands in there, but you'd probably have a separate bag for that anyways. So really nice bag that goes with the DLZ Creator. And again, thank you Mackie for sending over the DLZ Creator and the backpack as well. Both really nice bits of kit right there. But that about does it for this video. I'm curious what you think. If you have some experience with the DLZ Creator, or if you're curious about it, definitely drop a comment below. Also, if you plan on picking up any gear, including the DLZ, if you use my affiliate links below, then it helps out the channel. Thank you very much for that. If that does it, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time for another one. Peace.